What if I told you one letter could change everything? Lucas Kane, a billionaire who never lost, thought he had moved on, until his ex-fiancée received a love letter on the night of her wedding. Now, she's running, her perfect marriage shattered, and everyone is pointing fingers at him. But did he really send that letter? And if not, who did? Stick around, because by the end, you'll uncover the truth behind a game no one saw coming. Welcome to a world of untold stories and shocking truths. Some secrets change lives forever, and this one just might. Let's begin. Lucas Kane never lost. Not in business, not in life, and certainly not in love. At least, that's what he told himself. The towering billionaire had built his empire from nothing, crushing anyone who stood in his way. He was cold, calculating and completely in control, until her Charlotte Montgomery had been the perfect fiancée. Beautiful, elegant, and bred for high society. The kind of woman his family approved of. The kind of woman who would never embarrass him. That was why it stung when she left him, for a man who wasn't half as powerful, a man who didn't have billions in his bank account but had something Lucas apparently lacked, a heart. Now, Charlotte was marrying that man. And Lucas? He wasn't about to show up alone looking like the bitter ex. Though if she wanted to flaunt her happiness, he'd give her a show she'd never forget. That's when he found her. Sitting at the dimly lit bar of an upscale restaurant, Harper Langley stirred her drink with the air of someone who had long since given up on life, surprising her. She was used to being invisible. The daughter of a disgraced businessman, she had clawed her way through life, working dead-end jobs just to keep the lights on. Right now she was a waitress in a city where the rich barely acknowledged the poor. And then Lucas Kane walked in. He spotted her immediately, not because she was the most beautiful woman in the room, but because she was the least likely person anyone would expect on his arm. She was nothing like Charlotte, and that was the point. Sliding into the seat beside her, he studied her, his gaze sharp, assessing. "You look like you could use a drink." Harper arched an eyebrow. "And you look like you could use a soul. Guess we both have problems." A smirk tugged at his lips. Fiery, he liked that. "I have a proposition," he said smoothly. "One night, no strings. You pretend to be my date, and in return, I'll make it worth your while." Harper's laugh was bitter. "Let me guess, you need a warm body for some event and I happen to be convenient?" "Something like that." She was about to decline. She didn't belong in his world, and she knew better than to get involved with men like him. But then he slid a sleek black card across the table. "Name your price." The temptation was immediate. Rent was due. Bills were piling up. And Lucas Kane? He was the kind of man who could change a life with a single check. So she picked up the card and met his gaze. "Fine, but just so we're clear, I don't play the role of a meek, obedient arm candy." Lucas's smirk deepened. "I wouldn't expect anything less." 2 days later, she stepped into his private jet, wearing a designer dress she didn't pay for, and heels that felt like walking on daggers. Lucas barely looked at her as she took her seat. "This isn't a fairy tale," he warned. "Don't get any ideas." Harper rolled her eyes. "Trust me, Prince Charming, you're not my type." Neither of them knew just how much their worlds were about to collide. The private jet landed smoothly in Aspen, where Charlotte's extravagant winter wedding was set to take place. As Harper stepped off the plane, the cold mountain air hit her, but it wasn't nearly as icy as the man walking beside her. Lucas had barely spoken a word during the flight. He'd spent most of it on his phone, giving curt orders to his assistants and reviewing business reports as if this entire trip was just another deal to negotiate. Harper wasn't sure why that irritated her. It wasn't like she wanted his attention. She was just here for the paycheck, and yet something about his distant, calculated nature made her want to shake him. Did anything actually affect him? She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as they stepped into the sleek black SUV, waiting at the tarmac. The driver held the door open and Lucas gestured for her to get in first. "At least you have manners," she muttered. Lucas smirked but didn't respond. The ride to the luxury resort was quiet, but tension filled the space between them. Harper stole a glance at him, taking in his sharp jawline, his perfectly styled dark hair, and the way his expensive watch gleamed under the soft interior lighting. The man was annoyingly perfect. Too perfect, as if he had crafted himself into something untouchable. "What?" Lucas finally said, catching her staring. "Just wondering if you ever relax." His gaze flicked to her, unreadable. "Relaxation is a luxury. I prefer control." Harper smiled sweetly and leaned into Lucas, resting a hand on his chest. "Showtime," she whispered. Lucas stiffened, but to his credit, he played along, sliding an arm around her waist as if she belonged there. They hadn't taken more than 3 steps before a sharp voice interrupted them. Well, Lucas Kane finally gracing us with his presence." Harper turned to see a tall, impeccably dressed woman with icy blue eyes and a smirk that didn't quite reach them. "Margaret," Lucas greeted coolly. Harper recognized her instantly, Charlotte's mother, the woman who had once approved of Lucas until he was no longer convenient. Margaret's gaze flickered to Harper, assessing her from head to toe. Her lips curled ever so slightly, as if amused. "And who might you be?" Harper didn't flinch. Instead, she extended her hand with a dazzling smile. "Harper Langley, Lucas's date." Margaret barely concealed her condescension. "Charmed." Harper knew what she was thinking. Who is she? Where did he find her? Charlotte approached then, her fiancé in tow. "Lucas," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I didn't think you'd come." Lucas's grip on Harper tightened. "Why wouldn't I?" Charlotte's eyes flickered to Harper. "And you brought a guest." Harper could feel the weight of the room watching, waiting for her to mess up, to prove she didn't belong, so she did something no one expected. She smiled wider, slipped an arm through Lucas's and leaned up to kiss his cheek, slow, deliberate, lingering just long enough to make a statement. When she pulled back, Lucas's jaw was clenched, his posture rigid. Charlotte blinked, clearly taken aback. Her fiancé looked uncomfortable. Margaret's smirk had vanished, and just like that, Harper had turned the tables. She wasn't here to be pitied. She wasn't here to blend in. She was here to win the game. The air in the ballroom was thick with tension. Harper could feel the weight of every gaze locked onto her, some curious, others outright hostile, but she didn't let it shake her. If Lucas wanted a scene, she was about to give them one they wouldn't forget. Charlotte's fiancé, Henry Whitmore, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Lucas, good to see you. It's been a while." Lucas's expression was unreadable. "Not long enough." Harper's fingers subtly brushed against his arm, a silent reminder. "Play the part." Lucas exhaled sharply and forced a smirk. "Congratulations, Henry. I suppose Charlotte finally found what she was looking for." Harper didn't miss the flicker of something in Charlotte's eyes. Regret, maybe. Or was it something else? Charlotte straightened, regaining her composure. "I'm just glad you could come," she said, her tone saccharine, "and with a friend." Harper's smile didn't waver. "Oh, Lucas and I are much more than friends." Charlotte's brows lifted. "Oh?" Lucas tensed beside her, but Harper pressed on, her voice silky smooth. "He doesn't talk about me much because he's protective," she said, tilting her head in faux sweetness. "We prefer to keep things private." Charlotte's lips parted, but before she could respond, Margaret interjected. "That's fascinating," she said, her tone barely concealing her skepticism. "Tell me, Harper, where exactly did you and Lucas meet?" Harper held her gaze, refusing to be intimidated. She could play this game just as well as they could. She let out a soft laugh, running a hand down Lucas's arm as if reliving a memory. "It was unexpected," she mused. "A chance meeting. One of those moments where you just know." Lucas shot her a warning look, but Harper ignored it. She could practically feel the room hanging onto her every word, waiting for her to slip. Up Charlotte arched an eyebrow. "How romantic. And what is it that you do, Harper?" Harper met her gaze without hesitation. "I inspire people." Margaret snorted, unimpressed. "Inspire? Is that what they call it these days?" Harper tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Why, what exactly do they call it these days?" A few guests nearby gasped at her audacity. Charlotte's jaw tensed, and Margaret's expression darkened. Lucas suddenly squeezed Harper's hand, a subtle warning to dial it back. But Harper wasn't done yet. She turned her attention to Henry, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "And you," she said smoothly, "you must be quite the man. To win over someone like Charlotte." Henry chuckled nervously. Well, Charlotte slipped her arm through his and shot Harper a tight smile. "Henry is wonderful. We're very happy." Harper's expression remained pleasant, but inside she was calculating. Happy? Then why did Charlotte keep glancing at Lucas when she thought no one was looking? Harper stepped closer to Lucas, lacing her fingers through his. "Well, I think it's lovely how exes can come together to celebrate new love, don't you?" she mused. Charlotte's smile twitched. "Of course." Margaret, clearly unimpressed, turned to Lucas. "You used to have impeccable taste. I hope that hasn't changed." Harper's amusement flickered into something sharper. Before Lucas could speak, she cut in, her voice laced with feigned innocence. "Oh, Margaret," she purred. "It must be so hard for you, watching Lucas move on. You did invest so much into making sure Charlotte was his perfect match, didn't you?" Margaret's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "I only wanted what was best for him." Harper let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, I'm sure you did." "Too bad he decided otherwise." Lucas finally spoke then, his voice calm but edged. "Harper." She glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. His grip on her hand was tighter now, his thumb pressing into her palm, a silent command to stand. "Down." Harper debated for a moment. She could push further, watch the carefully crafted world of these high society elites crack under the weight of their own arrogance, or she could play smart. She exhaled slowly and softened her tone. "You know," she said, turning back to Charlotte, "I genuinely wish you the best, Charlotte, really. I just hope you finally found someone who truly sees you." A flicker of emotion crossed Charlotte's face. There and gone in an instant. Margaret, however, wasn't ready to let it go. "Well, dear, if inspiration doesn't work out for you, I do hope you have a backup plan." Harper smiled, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, don't worry about me, Margaret. I always land on my feet." With that, she turned to Lucas and whispered, just loud enough for the others to hear, "Dance with me." Lucas hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "What?" She took his hand and pulled him toward the dance floor. "You did bring me here to play a role, didn't you?" she murmured. Lucas sighed but didn't resist. "You're impossible," Harper smirked. "You love it." As they stepped onto the dance floor, she could feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes watching them. And just like that, she realized something. She wasn't just playing along, she was winning. As the soft strains of a waltz played in the background, Lucas placed a firm hand on Harper's waist, guiding her effortlessly across the dance floor. He was an exceptional dancer. Of course he was. Everything about him was precise, controlled, calculated. But Harper had other plans. She tilted her head up, meeting his intense gaze. "Relax," she whispered. "You look like you're plotting a hostile takeover." Lucas smirked, though his grip on her waist remained firm. "Dancing is a form of strategy." Harper rolled her eyes. "Yeah, because twirling around in expensive shoes is so high stakes." Lucas dipped her suddenly, and Harper let out a startled gasp. When he pulled her back up, his smirk deepened. "Everything is high stakes, Harper, even this." She narrowed her eyes but didn't argue, because he was right. This wasn't just a dance, it was a performance, a message to the entire room. Lucas Kane wasn't just here, he had moved on. Harper let herself sink into the role, leaning in closer than necessary. Her fingers trailed lightly against the back of his neck, just enough to make his posture stiffen. "You're playing with fire," he muttered under his breath. She smiled sweetly. "So are you." They moved in perfect sync, an undeniable energy crackling between them. She could see the way people whispered behind their champagne glasses, their gazes flickering between her and Charlotte, between Lucas and Henry. And then, right on cue, Charlotte and Henry joined the dance floor. Harper caught Charlotte stealing glances at Lucas, her expression unreadable. Maybe it was the lighting. Maybe it was just Harper's imagination, or maybe, just maybe, Charlotte wasn't as happy as she pretended to be. Harper leaned in closer, lowering her voice just enough for only Lucas to hear. "She keeps looking at you." Lucas didn't react. "I don't care." Harper arched a brow. "Are you sure?" His grip on her waist tightened ever so slightly. "Yes." But Harper wasn't convinced. She pulled back just enough to study him. He was too composed, too unaffected. He could fool the rest of the world, but she wasn't buying it. "You loved her," she murmured. "Didn't you?" Lucas didn't answer right away. Instead, he spun her effortlessly, his movements smooth and controlled. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost detached. "Love is irrelevant. She made her choice. I made mine." Harper searched his face. There was something there, something buried beneath the cold, impenetrable surface. Before she could push further, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "You two look your cozy, Charlotte." Harper turned her head just in time to see Charlotte and Henry dancing beside them. Charlotte's smile was pleasant, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. Lucas didn't miss a beat. "We are." Charlotte's gaze flickered between them before settling on Harper. "I must say, Harper, you're quite the surprise." Harper matched her smile. "I like to keep people on their toes." Henry chuckled nervously, clearly sensing the tension. "Well, it's great to see Lucas happy." Lucas didn't acknowledge the comment, but Harper did. "Oh, he's very happy," she purred, running a hand down Lucas's arm. "Aren't you, darling?" Lucas, to his credit, played along. He pulled Harper closer, his fingers grazing her lower back. Ecstatic. Charlotte's smile didn't waver, but Harper could see it. The slight clench of her jaw, the way her fingers curled just a little tighter around Henry's hand. Oh, this was fun. Just as Harper was about to push further, a voice interrupted. "May I cut in?" Harper turned to see an older gentleman, distinguished in a navy suit, watching her with mild interest. Lucas stiffened. "Harper, this is Richard Whitmore, Henry's father." "Ah, the father of the groom." Harper smiled politely. "Of course, as—" Lucas reluctantly stepped back. Harper took Richard's hand, allowing him to guide her into a slower, more deliberate dance. "So," Richard began, his tone casual. "Lucas Kane's new mystery woman," Harper smirked. "Is that what they're calling me?" Richard chuckled. "That's the polite version." Harper raised a brow. "And what's the impolite version?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say people are curious." Harper shrugged. "People are nosy." Richard nodded. "Perhaps. But in this world, perception is everything. And you, my dear, are an enigma." Harper tilted her head. "Is that a good thing?" Richard's smile was unreadable. "That depends. Do you have anything to hide?" Harper held his gaze unflinching. "Do you?" Richard let out a slow chuckle, clearly amused. "I can see why Lucas brought you," she smirked. "Can you?" Richard's expression remained calm, but there was something behind his eyes, something that told Harper he wasn't just making conversation. He was testing her, and she wasn't sure why. As the dance ended, Richard gave her a polite nod before stepping away. Harper exhaled slowly, scanning the room until she found Lucas watching her from across the ballroom. His gaze was unreadable, but there was something else there, something new, interest, intrigue, and just the faintest hint of respect. Harper smiled. To herself, this night was far from over. Harper made her way back to Lucas, her pulse still steady from her dance with Richard Whitmore. That man was no ordinary wedding guest. He was a strategist, a puppet master. He had assessed her with the precision of someone who never asked a question without already knowing the answer. Lucas didn't say a word as she approached, but his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You didn't tell me you were planning to charm Henry's father," he murmured. Harper smirked. "Didn't know I needed permission." Lucas's lips twitched. "What did he say to you?" She folded her arms. "Oh, nothing much. Just that people are curious about me." She tilted her head. "Why do I get the feeling that wasn't just small talk?" Lucas sighed, his jaw tightening slightly. "Richard isn't someone you want to underestimate." Harper raised a brow. "Oh, I never underestimate rich men who enjoy playing mind games." A flash of something, amusement, crossed Lucas's face, but before he could reply, a new voice interrupted. "Lucas." Harper turned and her stomach twisted ever so slightly. Charlotte, alone. Lucas's entire body went rigid beside her. He wasn't the type to show emotions, but Harper had spent enough time studying him tonight to see the tension in his shoulders, the flicker of something in his expression. "Charlotte," he said, his voice cool, "shouldn't you be with your husband-to-be?" Charlotte hesitated, glancing toward Henry, who was distracted by a conversation across the room. Then she turned back to Lucas, her gaze softer now. "I just wanted to talk," she said quietly. "Alone." Harper felt Lucas's fingers twitch at his side. He was hesitating, and that told her everything she needed to know. Charlotte still had a hold on him. Harper straightened, her stomach tightening in irritation. This was not part of the plan, but then something in her gut told her that if she left now, she wouldn't just be stepping away from Lucas, she'd be losing. So instead of waiting for Lucas to decide, she took the lead. With a deliberately sweet smile, she looped her arm through his and turned to Charlotte. "Oh, I don't mind," she said cheerfully. "Lucas and I share everything." Lucas stiffened. Charlotte's expression faltered, if only for a second. Then she forced a polite smile. Of course, Harper could see it now, the hesitation in Charlotte's eyes, the way she hadn't expected this. Charlotte had come over expecting to get Lucas alone. To say what exactly? Harper wasn't sure, but she wasn't about to give Charlotte that chance. "I must say," Harper continued, her tone light but pointed, "this wedding is stunning." "You must be thrilled," Charlotte hesitated. "I am." "Good," Harper said, tightening her grip on Lucas's arm, "because Lucas and I just love seeing people happy, don't we, darling?" Lucas glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. But she could feel the tension in his body. Harper didn't let it shake her. Instead, she reached up and adjusted the collar of his suit jacket, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The motion was subtle, intimate, and Charlotte noticed, for a split second, something flickered in her eyes, something that looked an awful lot like jealousy. That's when Harper knew. Charlotte wasn't entirely over Lucas Kane. Interesting. Before Charlotte could respond, Henry finally noticed his fiancée's absence and made his way over. "Ah, there you are," he said with a warm smile. He placed a hand on Charlotte's back, oblivious to the tension. Lucas, ever composed, nodded in Henry's direction. "Congratulations again, Henry." "Thank you," Henry said earnestly. "It means a lot that you came." Harper studied Henry. He seemed genuine, like the kind of man who actually cared about Charlotte, who wasn't caught up in power games the way Lucas and his world were. And yet, Harper's gaze flicked back to Charlotte, whose fingers had tightened slightly against Henry's arm. Charlotte wasn't happy. Not completely. Harper wasn't sure why she cared, but something about this whole situation didn't sit right. She glanced up at Lucas, who was staring at Charlotte with the kind of look a man gives when he's trying not to care. Something was going on here, and Harper intended to find out what. With a final dazzling smile, she tugged Lucas toward the bar. "Come on, darling. I need another drink." Lucas let her pull him away without protest, but as soon as they were out of earshot, he turned to her with a sharp look. "What the hell was that?" Harper smirked. "That, Lucas, was me making sure you didn't look like a lovesick fool in front of your ex-fiancé." Lucas exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You didn't have to do that." She tilted her head. "Didn't I?" Silence stretched between them. Finally, Lucas sighed, shaking his head. "You're dangerous." Harper grinned. "I know." But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that this night was far from over. And if she was right, the biggest shock of the evening was yet to come. Harper took a slow sip of her drink, letting the warmth of the liquor settle in her chest. Across from her, Lucas leaned against the bar, his sharp gaze fixed on her, unreadable. "You're enjoying this way too much," he muttered. Harper smirked, setting her glass down. "Well, I was hired for entertainment, wasn't I?" Lucas exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "This isn't a joke, Harper." "Oh, trust me, I know." She tilted her head. "You didn't expect her to look at you like that, did you?" Lucas's fingers tightened around his glass. "Charlotte made her choice," Harper studied him for a beat. Yeah, then why do you still look like a man who doesn't believe that? Lucas's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. Harper leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. She's not over you, Lucas scoffed. She's marrying another man. Harper shrugged. Doesn't mean she's happy about it. Lucas shook his head, setting his glass down a little too hard. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Harper tapped a manicured finger against the bar. She asked to speak to you alone. That's not something a woman completely in love with her fiancé does. Lucas went quiet. His fingers drummed against the bar, his mind clearly working through something. Harper took another sip of her drink, letting the silence stretch. And then, a sharp, unmistakable gasp echoed from the other side of the ballroom. Both Harper and Lucas turned just in time to see Charlotte standing near the grand staircase, her face ashen white. The entire room had gone still. Charlotte's hands trembled as she clutched something, a piece of paper. No, a letter. And Harper's instincts immediately kicked in. Something was very, very wrong. Henry stood beside Charlotte, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. Charlotte, what is it? Charlotte didn't answer. Her lips parted. Her throat worked as if trying to form words, but nothing came out. Margaret rushed forward, her usually composed demeanor cracking ever so slightly. Charlotte, what's the matter? Still no response. Harper shot a glance at Lucas. His entire body had gone rigid, his gaze locked onto Charlotte with a look she couldn't quite place. And then, just as the silence stretched unbearably long, Charlotte dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor like something weightless, yet its impact was thunderous. Harper moved instinctively, stepping closer. But before she could see what the letter contained, Charlotte suddenly turned on her heel and ran. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Charlotte bolted toward the doors, her emerald gown sweeping behind. Her? Henry, flustered, tried to grab her hand, but she jerked away. Charlotte, wait! But she didn't stop. She didn't even look back. The doors slammed shut behind her. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Then, Margaret's sharp, clipped voice cut through the tension. Lucas Kane. Every head turned in his direction, including Harper's, Lucas's. Expression was blank, but Harper could see the tension rolling off him. Margaret took a slow step forward, her eyes flashing. What did you do? Lucas didn't flinch. Nothing. Margaret let out a bitter laugh. Nothing? My daughter just ran out of her own wedding reception, and you expect me to believe that's a coincidence? Lucas's voice was calm, too calm. Believe what you want. Henry bent down and picked up the letter, his hands trembling slightly as he read it. His face paled. This can't be real, he whispered. Harper finally had enough. She moved forward and plucked the letter from Henry's hands, ignoring the startled looks from those around her. And then she read it. Her breath caught. It was a letter. A love letter, from Lucas dated 2 weeks ago. Harper's stomach twisted as she glanced up at Lucas. His expression was stone cold, but something flickered in his eyes, something dark. Margaret snatched the letter from Harper's hands, her face contorting with rage as she scanned the words. So this was your plan to sabotage her wedding? Lucas said nothing. Harper wasn't sure if it was because he was guilty or because he was choosing not to defend himself, but then Henry spoke, his voice low and pained. Did she leave to find you? Lucas didn't answer immediately, but Harper already knew the truth. Charlotte hadn't run away from Henry. She had run to Lucas. And suddenly Harper realized something that made her blood run cold. This wasn't just a fake date to get back at an ex. This was something much, much bigger. She turned to Lucas, her pulse pounding. Tell me the truth, she whispered. Did you send that letter? Lucas's gaze flicked to hers, and for the first time since she met him, she saw doubt in his eyes, a crack in the armor, and Harper had no idea if she had just walked into his game, or if she had been playing herself all along. The air in the ballroom had turned suffocating, thick with whispers, sharp glances, and barely concealed gasps. Harper's pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at Lucas, waiting for an answer. Did you send that letter? Lucas's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking to the letter Margaret still held in her trembling fingers. He was calculating, too calculating. "Lucas," Harper pressed, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. "Tell me the truth." His piercing blue eyes met hers, and for a second she thought he might actually say it. "Yes, I sent it. Yes, I wanted her to run. Yes, I wanted to destroy this wedding, but—" Instead he exhaled sharply, straightening his posture. "I didn't send that letter." Harper felt something cold slip down her spine. Margaret let out a bitter laugh. "So what? It just magically appeared at her wedding?" Henry, still gripping the letter, ran a shaky hand through his hair. "Charlotte wouldn't run unless she believed something in here. Someone had to have given it to her." Harper glanced at Lucas, watching him carefully. His face was unreadable, his posture locked down like steel. But something in his expression, something deep, told her he wasn't lying. He hadn't sent that letter, but someone else had. Harper's mind whirled. Who would gain from this? Who had access to something so personal? And more importantly, where had Charlotte gone? Before she could voice the question, Margaret turned her furious gaze on Lucas. "If anything happens to my daughter because of you—" Lucas's expression darkened. "You should be asking where she is instead of throwing accusations." Margaret's nostrils flared, but Henry spoke before she could. "I need to find her." His voice was desperate, broken. He turned abruptly, heading toward the exit, his pace quickening. Lucas watched him go, his expression still unreadable. But Harper felt the moment something shifted in him. Before she could stop herself, she grabbed his wrist. "You're going after her too, aren't you?" Lucas didn't answer, but he didn't have to. Harper knew that look in his eyes. He had already decided. Without another word, Lucas strode toward the exit, his long strides unbothered by the stairs following him. Harper exhaled sharply, then, against her better judgment, moved to follow. Margaret's voice stopped her. "Where do you think you're going?" Harper turned slowly. "To make sure your daughter doesn't do something she regrets." Margaret let out a scoff. "You don't belong in this." Harper smirked, stepping closer. "Oh, but you see, Margaret, I always land on my feet." And with that, she turned on her heel and followed Lucas into the cold night. Outside, the icy air hit Harper's skin like a slap, but she barely felt it. Lucas was already moving toward the parking lot, his pace fast and deliberate. "Lucas!" she called, jogging to catch up. "Wait a second." He didn't slow. "Go back inside, Harper." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. "Are you serious? You need me." Lucas finally turned, his expression tight with frustration. "This isn't your fight." Harper folded her arms. "Oh? Because last I checked, I've been neck-deep in whatever this mess is from the moment you dragged me here." Lucas exhaled through his nose. "Harper," she ran, because she thought that letter was real. Someone wanted her to think that. "And if you don't want to figure out who, I do." Lucas's jaw worked, his mind warring with itself. Finally, he let out a low curse and turned toward a sleek black car. "Get in," he said. Harper didn't hesitate. The drive was tense, the silence thick. Lucas's fingers gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly, his eyes locked on the dark road ahead. Harper tapped her fingers against her knee. "So, where exactly are we going?" Lucas didn't glance at her. "If she ran, there's only one place she'd go." Harper raised a brow. "And that would be—" Lucas finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Our old house." Harper's breath caught. Their house. The one he shared with Charlotte. Before she could say anything, the headlights of another car up ahead caught their attention. It was parked on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking, and standing beside it, arms wrapped tightly around herself, was Charlotte. Lucas cursed under his breath, pulling the car to a stop. Before Harper could even process what was happening, Lucas was already out of the car, striding toward his ex-fiancée. Harper followed, keeping a cautious distance. Charlotte looked up at Lucas, her eyes rimmed with unshed tears. "You came," she whispered. Lucas's jaw tightened. "Of course I did." Charlotte swallowed hard, glancing at Harper briefly before turning back to Lucas. I didn't know what else to do, she admitted. I saw the letter and... She sucked in a sharp breath. I had to know if it was real. Lucas exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't. Charlotte searched his face. But if it had been... Harper stiffened. Lucas went silent. And in that moment, Harper knew Charlotte wasn't just looking for answers, she was looking for a reason. And Harper wasn't sure who would end up more heartbroken by the time this night was over. The silence between Lucas and Charlotte stretched, thick with unspoken words, unresolved history, and the weight of a choice neither of them had expected to face tonight. Harper stood slightly behind Lucas, arms crossed, watching. This wasn't her fight, but she couldn't shake the feeling that somehow she had become part of it anyway. Charlotte's lower lip trembled. Lucas, if that letter had been real, would you have meant it? Lucas exhaled sharply, his hands resting on his hips as he looked up at the night sky. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, tinged with something Harper had never heard from him before. Regret. It doesn't matter, he said. Charlotte flinched. It matters to me. Lucas let out a hollow chuckle, shaking his head. You left me, Charlotte. You made your choice. His voice grew quieter, but Harper still heard every word. You didn't even look back. Charlotte swallowed hard. I thought I was doing the right thing. Lucas's gaze snapped back to her. For who? Harper's breath caught at the rawness in his voice. This was no longer the cold, unfeeling billionaire who had walked into the wedding tonight just to prove a point. This was the man underneath, the one who had once loved Charlotte enough to let her destroy him. Charlotte's lips parted, but no sound came out. Lucas shook his head. I would have given you everything, Charlotte, and you still walked away. Charlotte squeezed her eyes shut, like she was battling an internal war. When she opened them again, they shimmered with unshed tears. I was scared. Lucas stilled. Charlotte took a shaky breath. I was scared of being with someone like you. Someone who could make me feel things so intensely. I didn't know if I could survive it. You're all-consuming, Lucas, and I wasn't strong enough to handle that. Harper felt something twist in her chest. Lucas, however, didn't react. His face was unreadable. So you chose safe. Charlotte let out a breath. I chose Henry. Lucas nodded, his expression eerily calm. And yet, here you are. Harper could see the battle waging within Charlotte, could see the moment doubt crept in. Finally, Charlotte took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Tell me not to go back to him. Harper's stomach clenched. This was it, the moment that would change everything. Lucas stared at her, his blue eyes unreadable. Charlotte. Charlotte's breath hitched. Tell me, she pleaded. Tell me to stay. The world seemed to hold its breath. Harper watched as Lucas's jaw clenched, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. Then, slowly, his expression shifted. He exhaled and stepped back. I can't. Charlotte's face crumbled. Lucas's voice was quiet but firm. You don't need me to make your choices for you, Charlotte. You already did that when you left. Tears slipped down Charlotte's cheeks. So that's it? Lucas nodded, his gaze unwavering. That's it. A sharp, broken breath escaped Charlotte's lips. For a moment, Harper thought she might say something else, but then she turned and walked away. Harper watched her go, her emerald gown shimmering under the streetlights. She climbed into her car without looking back, and just like that, she was gone. Silence settled between Harper and Lucas. After a long moment, Harper sighed. Well, that was dramatic. Lucas let out a dry chuckle, rubbing a hand over his face. You have no idea. Harper studied him, searching for any cracks in his mask. You okay? Lucas looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. I should be, he murmured. Harper smirked. But you're not. Lucas didn't confirm or deny it. Instead, he turned toward his car, opening the door. Come on, let's get out of here. Harper hesitated for only a second before following. As the car rumbled to life, she glanced at him from the passenger seat. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Lucas's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Yeah? Harper nodded. Yeah. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights blurring past them, and for the first time since the night began, Harper realized something. She had come here expecting to be a pawn in Lucas's game. But somehow, somewhere along the way, she had become something more, and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to show your support. It truly helps me bring more impactful stories to you. If you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more emotional, thought-provoking tales. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and share. What part of the story touched you most or how it made you feel? Your feedback means the world and shapes the future of the channel. Thank you for being part of this community.